Imagine a machine made of 5,000 men. It doesn't just fight, it digs, it calculates, it builds, and it eats its way across continents. In 1005 AD, the Roman legion wasn't just an army. It was the world's first industrialized war machine. Forget the marble statues and the Hollywood speeches. Today, we step into the mud of the Danube frontier to follow Quintus, a seasoned mule of Marius, through 24 hours of crushing labor, iron discipline, and the sheer mechanical grit required to forge an empire. This is the reality of the Roman legionnaire. Chapter 1. The Fourth Watch. It is 3 a.m. In the military camps of the Roman Empire, time isn't measured by minutes, but by the watches. We are in the fourth watch. Outside the leather walls of the Papilio, the butterfly tent, the air along the Danube is a thick, frigid soup of river mist and wood smoke. Quintus opens his eyes. He doesn't move immediately. He lies on a thin bed of straw, his body wrapped in a rough wool cloak that has seen 3 seasons of campaigning. He is 40 years old, a veteran of the Germanic frontier and now Trajan's Dacia. He is a mule of Marius, a professional soldier who has spent more of his life in these cramped 8-man units than he ever did in his father's house in Italy. The tent is a sensory trap. 8 men, the Contubernium, sleep here in a space meant for 6. The air is stagnant, heavy with the smell of wet wool, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, acidic tang of the goatskin leather that keeps the rain out, but the moisture in. The bucina, a massive circular bronze horn, has just sounded from the center of the camp. It is the signal for the final watch to end and the day of the Roman machine to begin. There is no snooze button in the Roman army. If you are late to the morning assembly, the Centurion's vine staff will find your ribs before your coffee does. Not that Quintus has coffee. The Roman legionary does not get dressed. He assembles himself. Quintus reaches for his tunica, a heavy, dark red wool garment. It isn't red for the glory of Rome. It's red because it hides the dirt and the inevitable stains of rust and blood. Then comes the centerpiece of the Roman industrial age, the lorica segmentata. To the casual observer, this is just armor. To Quintus, it is a complex temperamental machine of iron and leather. He pulls the 4 main sections of the plate armor toward him. The segmentata is a marvel of engineering, overlapping iron bands that allow for flexibility while providing a solid wall against Dacian falx blades. But it is a nightmare to maintain. In the damp river air, the iron wants to rust. It wants to seize up. Quintus needs help. He can't buckle the backplates himself. This is the first technical ritual of the day, the buddy system that keeps the legion functioning. He turns his back to Rufus, a younger soldier from the south of Gaul. Wordlessly, Rufus begins threading the leather laces through the brass hooks. Tighten the shoulder plates, Quintus grunts. His voice is gravel. They're as tight as they'll go, old man, Rufus whispers back. The leather's swollen from the rain. This is the reality of the Roman soldier. He is a technician. He spends hours every week ensuring the brass hinges of his armor aren't corroded, and that the internal leather straps aren't rotting. If a single lace snaps in the heat of a push of shields, the plate can slip, leaving a gap for a Dacian spear. Next comes the cingulum, the military belt. To a civilian, it looks like a decorative apron of leather strips and brass studs. To Quintus, it is his identity. The jingle of the brass plates as he moves is the sound of the soldier. Without this belt, he is just a man in a tunic. With it, he is a representative of the emperor's law. Finally, he sits to address his feet. He pulls on his caligae. These aren't sandals. They are heavy-duty, open-air combat boots. The soles are an inch thick, made of layered leather and studded with 80 to 100 iron hobnails. As Quintus laces the leather thongs up his ankles, he feels the weight. These boots are designed to march 500,000 steps without falling apart. They are the tires of the Roman vehicle, When thousands of men wear these, the ground doesn't just rumble, it vibrates. This is the Tesserarius, the sergeant of the watch. He isn't here for a chat. He is carrying the paperwork of Empire, 4th cohort, 3rd maniple, the Tesserarius barks. Quintus, you're on the baggage detail for the first 6 miles. Rufus, you're on the ditch-clearing party once we reach the evening site. The Roman army is a bureaucracy that happens to carry swords. Every man's duty is logged. Every cent is tracked. Quintus knows that somewhere in the camp's headquarters, a clerk is currently updating a leather-bound ledger. It tracks his pay 900 sesterces a year, but more importantly, it tracks his deductions. Money is taken out for his food, his hay, his boots, and his contribution to the unit's burial club. In the Roman army, even your death is an itemized expense. Quintus stands. He is now encased in 25 pounds of iron and leather. He feels the familiar ache in his lower back, the legacy of 20 years of the burden. He reaches for his pilum, the heavy javelin, and steps out of the tent into the freezing Mosian morning. The camp is alive. Thousands of men are doing exactly what he just did. There is no shouting, only the low murmur of professional soldiers and the clack, clack, clack of iron on iron. The sun isn't even up, Rufus grumbles, shivering as the river wind hits them. The sun doesn't have a schedule, Quintus says, adjusting his belt. The legate does. Move. They have 2 hours to pack the entire city, eat a handful of cold grain, and begin a 20-mile march into enemy territory. The machine is turning, and Quintus is just one of its many, many iron teeth. Chapter 2. The Burden. The Roman legionary of the 2nd century was not just a soldier. He was a surveyor, a carpenter, a mason, and above all, a beast of burden. Historians call them Marius's mules, a nickname earned a century earlier but one that fits Quintus perfectly in 105 AD. As the 4th watch ends, the most grueling ritual of the day begins, the assembly of the Sarcina, the marching pack. Quintus does not have a backpack in the modern sense. Straps over the shoulders would interfere with his lorica segmentata, chafing the leather and digging into the iron plates. Instead, he uses the furca. The physics of the furca. The furca is a simple, cross-shaped wooden pole, but it is the backbone of Roman logistics. By lashing his gear to this pole and resting it over his shoulder, Quintus can carry 80 pounds of equipment while keeping his center of gravity stable. More importantly, it features a quick-release mechanism. If the column is ambushed, Quintus can shrug the pole off his shoulder in a second, dropping his entire life's belongings to the dirt so he can draw his sword and transition from a laborer to a killer. On this pole, Quintus must fit his entire existence. He starts with the loculus, a heavy-duty leather satchel. Inside are his spare tunics, a pair of thick wool socks for the Dacian winter, and his beauty kit, a small bronze razor, an oil flask, and a strigil for scraping the sweat from his skin. Next comes the kitchen. Every 8-man contubernium is a self-sustaining cell. Quintus carries the patera, a bronze mess tin used for everything from scooping water to eating porridge. He lashes a heavy bronze cooking pot, the situla, to the frame. It clatters against the wood, a sound that will haunt his ears for the next 8 hours of marching. Finally, he adds the tools of the industrial war. Every man carries a heavy wicker basket for moving earth, a shovel, or a pickaxe. He also carries 2 pila muralia thick, 5-foot-long wooden stakes, sharpened at both ends and narrowed in the middle for easy lashing. These aren't weapons, they are the bricks of the knightly fortress. Multiply Quintus by 5,000 and the legion isn't just an army, it's a prefabricated city moving at 4 miles per hour. The weight of empire. Quintus feels the bite of the wood against his trapezius muscle, even through the thick wool of his cloak and the padding beneath his armor. The 80-pound load is an invasive force. It compresses his spine and makes his knees click with every adjustment. The air is thick with the smell of raw, damp grain. Lashed to the top of his pack is a leather bag containing 3 days' worth of unground wheat. It is heavy, nearly 15 pounds of it, and it smells of dust and the granary floor. As he cinches the leather thongs, he can feel the grit of the flour on his fingers, mixing with the cold morning dew to create a thin paste. There is a specific sound to this moment, the industrial hum of the Legion. It's the rhythmic thwack of leather being pulled tight, the metallic clink of bronze pots hitting iron breastplates, and the low guttural curses of men who have slept only 4 hours. Quintus adjusts the weight, feeling the balance. If the pack is lopsided by even an inch, it will blister his lower back before the first mile is over. He knows this weight better than he knows the weight of his own children back in Italy. The equipment audit. While Quintus struggles with his pack, a junior officer in Optio moves down the line with a wax tablet and a stylus. This is the equipment audit. In the Roman army, your gear is not a gift, it is a loan. When Quintus was first enlisted, the cost of his helmet, his armor, and his tools was deducted from his first 3 years of pay. Every item he carries has a serial number of sorts, or at least a mark identifying it as the property of the Legio III Flavia Felix. If Quintus loses his shovel during the march, he doesn't just get a new one. The cost is docked from his next stipendium paycheck. If he loses his pilum, the expensive high-carbon iron javelin, without a confirmed kill or a valid combat excuse, he might face a flogging for negligence of state property. The Optio stops in front of Quintus. "Check your leather straps, Quintus," the officer barks. "I see a fray on the loculus. If that bag drops in the mud today, you're paying for the grain inside." The Emperor doesn't feed the birds, he feeds the soldiers. Quintus doesn't argue. He reaches down, pulls a spare thong from his belt, and reinforces the knot. He knows the ledger in the quartermaster's tent is unforgiving. Every nail in his boots, every ounce of wheat in his bag, and every strap of leather is accounted for in a massive bureaucratic web that stretches all the way back to the administration offices in Rome. He stands now with his pilum in his right hand, the furca over his left shoulder, and his heavy scutum shield gripped by the horizontal handle. He is no longer a man, he is a silhouette of angles and burdens. The Centurion's whistle shrieks through the mist. Move out. The transition is jarring. One moment, the camp is a static collection of tents. The next, it is a flowing river of iron. As Quintus takes his first step, the hobnails in his boots bite into the soft Mosian mud. The 80 pounds on his back settle with a dull, sickening thud. He has 20 miles to go before he can put this burden down, and even then, he will only be trading the pole for a shovel. This is the Mule of Marius in his natural habitat, enduring the crushing weight of a civilization that refuses to stop moving. Dare! Chapter 3: The Imperial March. The transition from the static camp to the open road is where the Roman army ceases to be a collection of soldiers and becomes a machine of pure logistics. This is the iter iustum, the just march for Quintus. This is the most honest part of his life. It is the rhythmic, soul-crushing reality of an empire that expanded not through brilliant cavalry charges, but through the sheer, stubborn endurance of infantrymen walking. The cadence of conquest, to move 5,000 legionaries, 1,000 cavalrymen, and a massive baggage train through enemy territory without it dissolving into a disorganized mob, requires a mathematical precision that wouldn't be seen again for 1,500 years. The Roman military pace, the greatest, is set at 20 Roman miles in 5 summer hours, roughly 18 modern miles in 5 hours. This isn't a stroll, it's a power walk. At a full gradus, the legion moves at about 4 miles per hour. If the order for the iter magnum, the forced march, is given, that pace increases to 24 Roman miles in the same time frame. How do they maintain this? It's not through music or drums, Hollywood's favorite trope. It is maintained through the internal metronome of the centuria. Each century has a signifier carrying the standard, acting as a visual anchor. But for Quintus, the rhythm is kept by the man in front of him. He watches the back of Rufus's neck, the swaying of the furca pole, and the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of the hobnails hitting the road. The road itself is a marvel of the industrial war. Even here on the edges of the Dacia frontier, the Romans have already begun the work of permanent occupation. Under Quintus's feet isn't just mud, it is often the Via Militaris. These roads are engineered with a foundation of heavy stones, statumen, layers of gravel and lime rudis, and a surface of packed sand or paving stones. They are built with a camber, a slight curve, so that the relentless Dacian rain drains off into the side ditches rather than turning the path into a swamp. To Rome, a road is a weapon. It allows reinforcements to move at speeds the Dacian tribes cannot comprehend. The dust and the iron, the air is no longer cold. By 9 a.m., the sun is beating down on the Lorica segmentata, and the iron plates are beginning to act like an oven. Quintus can feel the sweat pooling in the small of his back, trapped against the wool of his tunic by the leather straps of his pack. The smell is overwhelming. It is the scent of 5,000 men in a confined space, sour sweat, the sharp tang of the vinegar water in their flasks, and the heavy, oily odor of the sheep fat used to keep their armor from rusting. But above all, there is the dust. Thousands of hobnailed boots grinding against the dry earth create a localized weather system. A fine yellow-gray powder coats Quintus's eyelashes, gets into his teeth, and turns his red tunic into a dull, earthy brown. Every breath tastes of grit. Then there is the sound. It is a physical weight. Clack, clack, clack. It is the sound of 100,000 iron nails striking the earth in unison. It is accompanied by the metallic jingle thud of the cingulum, the studded belt, and the creaking of leather. There is very little talking. Talking wastes breath, and breath is a resource to be managed. Suddenly, a thunderous vibration shakes the ground from the flank. Quintus doesn't turn his head, that would break the line, but he shifts his eyes. A unit of ala auxiliary cavalry is riding past the column. These are not Roman citizens, they are Thracians and Batavians, men from the fringes of the empire who trade their blood for the promise of citizenship in 25 years. They look different. They wear chainmail, lorica hamata, instead of plates, and their horses are small, sturdy steppe ponies. They are the eyes of the legion, riding out to scout the ridgelines for Dacian ambushes. As they gallop past, kicking up even more dust, one of the riders shouts something in a guttural Germanic dialect. Rufus mutters a curse under his breath about unwashed barbarians, but Quintus knows the truth. Without those scouts, the fourth cohort would be walking into a slaughter. The legion is the hammer, but the auxiliaries are the eyes. The itinerarium and the log, in the center of the column, surrounded by his personal guard. The legate, the general, is not just looking at the horizon, he is looking at his maps. Or more accurately, his itineraria. The Roman army lives and dies by the logbook. Every mile covered is recorded by the mensors, surveyors. They use a device called a hodometer, a series of gears attached to a wagon wheel that drops a small stone into a box every time a mile is completed. At the end of the day, the tesserarius will report the distance to the camp headquarters. This isn't for a sense of accomplishment, it's for supply chain management. The quartermaster back at the base on the Danube needs to know exactly where the fourth cohort is, so he can calculate when the next grain shipment needs to leave the river docks. The paperwork Quintus cares about, however, is the movement order. Every morning, the watchword and the day's objective are written on a tessera, a small wooden tablet, and passed down from the officers. Today's objective, Bridgehead Alpha, to the bureaucrats in Rome. This march is a line on a map. To Quintus, it is a calculation of calories and water. He knows that for every mile he walks, he is burning roughly 200 calories above his resting rate. He has a 3-day supply of grain in his pack. If the column slows down due to rain or a broken wagon axle, those 3 days of grain have to last 4. The paperwork doesn't just record their progress, it dictates their survival. He looks ahead. The road stretches into the dark forested foothills of the Carpathian Mountains. The industrial war is moving forward, one hobnailed step at a time. The Romans don't just conquer people, they out-logistics them. They walk until their enemies' borders simply cease to exist, replaced by the straight, unyielding lines of the Roman road. Keep the pace. The Centurion barks from the side of the road, his vine staff twitching in his hand. Quintus shifts the 80-pound pole on his shoulder, feels the new blister forming on his left heel, and keeps walking. The sun is at its zenith. The march is only half over. If the Roman road is the artery of the empire, the column is the blood. To the Dacian tribesmen watching from the ridges of the Carpathian foothills, the legion looks like a single, glittering, multi-segmented serpent. But to Quintus, trapped in the middle of it, the column is a masterpiece of traffic management and a nightmare of mechanical noise. Moving 5,000 men, a full legion, is a task of staggering complexity. If you march them all in a single block, the tail of the army would still be packing their tents while the head was reaching the next campsite. Instead, the legion is broken down into a specific, rigid hierarchy designed to ensure that if the head is bitten, the body can still fight. The anatomy of the impedimenta. The Roman army on the move is divided into 3 main sections: the vanguard, the main body, and the rear guard. The vanguard, leading the way, are the explorators, scouts, and the ala cavalry we saw earlier, followed by the pioneers, legionaries and laborers, tasked with clearing brush and leveling the ground before the heavy wagons arrive. The main body. This is where Quintus is. The cohorts march in order, but they are separated by their own baggage. The impedimenta, the baggage train. This is the literal impediment to the army's speed. For every 8-man contubernium, there is at least 1 mule. That is over 600 mules just for the grunt soldiers. Add to this the mules for the centurions, the horses for the officers, and the heavy wagons for the legate's pavilion and the siege engines. The industrial war is most visible in the Carabalistae. These are massive wagon-mounted bolt throwers, essentially heavy snipers on wheels. Each of the 10 cohorts has 5 of these machines. As they roll past, the wooden frames groan under the tension of twisted sinew, and the iron-tipped bolts, the size of small spears, rattle in their racks. These aren't just weapons. They are mobile artillery units that require constant maintenance and a dedicated crew of specialists to ensure the torsion springs don't snap in the humid Dacian air. The industrial heartbeat. The sound of the column is something Hollywood never gets right. It isn't the sound of drums, it is the sound of industrial friction. Imagine the sound of 100,000 iron nails striking the earth every second. Crunch clack, crunch clack. It is a rhythmic, metallic grinding that vibrates through the soles of Quintus's boots and up into his shin bones. Above this white noise of the boots is the cacophony of the baggage train. The mules are the loudest. They bray at the dust, their wooden pack saddles creaking with every step. The heavy wagons, their wheels bound in iron tires, scream as they hit stones in the road. And then there's the smell. If the morning was the smell of wet leather, the midday march is the smell of the beast. It is the pungent, ammonia-heavy scent of thousands of animals defecating on the very path Quintus has to walk. It's the smell of hot axle grease on the wagons, a mixture of animal fat and resin used to keep the wheels turning. The air is a thick, humid slurry of dust, animal musk, and the metallic tang of 5,000 suits of armor heating up in the sun. Quintus feels the sway of the column. Every time a wagon hits a rut or a mule stalls, a shock wave travels back through the line. The men in front stop, the men behind bunch up. It's like a massive ironclad accordion. "Keep your intervals," the Optio screams, his voice cracking from the dust. "I want to see 5 feet of daylight between the ranks. If the ranks bunch up, the column becomes vulnerable. A single Dacian ambush could trap thousands of men in a pileup where they can't even draw their swords." Quintus focuses on the gap. He measures his life in the 5 feet of dirt between him and Rufus's bouncing pack. The forage and fodder report. While Quintus marches, the paperwork of empire continues at a gallop. The Roman army does not just live off the land like a barbarian horde, it calculates the land. Riding near the baggage train is the primi ordines, senior centurions, and their clerks. They are constantly receiving reports from the scouts. These aren't just enemy-sighted reports, they are resource audits. Is there a stream 3 miles ahead? How many gallons per minute? Is the forest ahead oak or pine? Oak is better for the knight's fortifications. How much grazing land is available for the 1,000 animals? A single mule requires about 20 pounds of forage a day. For 1,000 mules, that is 20,000 pounds of grass and grain daily. If the column moves into a scorched earth zone where the Dacians have burned the fields, the Roman logistics machine has to pivot. Quintus watches a clerk on horseback ride past, clutching a bundle of papyrus scrolls protected by a leather tube. That clerk is likely carrying the commensurate supply list. It details exactly how many days of iron rations, the hardtack and grain in Quintus's pack, remain before the army must stop and wait for a river barge resupply. In the Roman army, a lost shipment of grain is a bigger disaster than a lost skirmish. If the paperwork shows a deficit, the march is halted. The soldiers aren't told why. They just see the officers huddling over tablets, gesturing toward the horizon. The friction of war. By the 8th hour of the march, the industrial aspect of the war becomes an industrial level of pain. The Lorica segmentata plates have been rubbing against Quintus's shoulders for 15 miles. The internal leather straps are soaked with sweat, causing them to stretch and sag. One of his shoulder plates is now biting into his collarbone. He can't stop to fix it. To stop is to break the machine. He has to wait for the 10-minute rest, a rare mercy dictated by the legate's watch. He looks at the wagons of the Caraballiste rolling past him. The crews are oiling the bronze gears even during the break. Everything is being maintained. Everything is being tracked. He looks down at his own hands. They are stained black from the iron of his armor and the grease of the road. He isn't a hero in a poem. He is a component. He is a bolt in a 5-mile-long machine that is currently being hammered into the heart of Dacia. The whistle blows. The crunching of the boots begins again. But as they crest the final hill of the day, Quintus sees them, the mensors, the surveyors. They are already standing on a distant plateau, their golden-colored groma, surveying tools catching the late afternoon sun. The march is ending. But for Quintus, the real work, the engineering war, is about to begin. Chapter 5, The Knightly City. The most terrifying thing about the Roman army wasn't its swords, it was its shovels. To an enemy like the Dacians, the legion was a monster that grew a hard, impenetrable shell every time it stopped to sleep. This is the ritual of the castra, the construction of a standardized, fortified city built from scratch in under 3 hours every single night of the campaign. For Quintus, the end of the march does not mean rest. It means the transition from mule to engineer. As the head of the column reaches the site, the 80-pound pack is finally swung off the shoulder. The groan Quintus lets out is a mixture of relief and the realization that his back must now endure a different kind of strain. The geometry of the groma, The Roman marching camp is not pitched, it is engineered. At the center of the chosen site stands the groma. The groma is a simple but ingenious surveying instrument, a vertical iron pole with a horizontal cross on top, from which 4 weighted plumb lines hang. By sighting across these lines, the mensors, surveyors, can establish perfect 90-degree angles. Within minutes of the army's arrival, the plateau is gridded out with colored flags. White flags mark the praetorium, the general's quarters. Red flags mark the Via Principalis, the main street. Every cohort in every contubernium has a pre-designated plot of dirt that is exactly the same size and in the same relative position as it was the night before, and the night before that. Quintus knows exactly where to go. He doesn't need to be told. His unit's spot is always the same distance from the eastern gate. This standardization is the industrial soul of Rome. It means that if a Dacian warband attacks in the pitch black of midnight, a soldier can wake up, exit his tent, and know exactly where the nearest gate, the nearest officer, and the nearest defensive line are located without a second of hesitation. The thunk of the dolabra. Quintus reaches into his gear and pulls out the dolabra, the heavy Roman entrenching tool. It is a formidable piece of iron, featuring a sharp axe blade on one side and a heavy pick on the other. The sound of the next 2 hours is the sound of industrial excavation. Thunk. 5,000 men are now digging the fossa, the trench. The standard requirement for a marching camp is a ditch 5 feet deep and 3 feet wide. The earth from this ditch isn't just tossed aside, it is thrown inward to create the agger, a defensive mound. Quintus feels the vibration of the pickaxe through his forearms. His hands, already callous, begin to sting as fresh blisters form over old ones. The smell of the morning's sweat has dried into a salty crust on his skin, but now a new scent takes over. The raw mineral smell of freshly turned earth. As the sun dips lower, the temperature drops, but Quintus is drenched. Steam rises from his shoulders as he heaves a wicker basket full of heavy clay up onto the mound. There is no talking here, only the rhythmic grunting of men pushed to the limit of human endurance. Once the mound is high enough, Quintus and Rufus retrieve the pila muralia, those heavy wooden stakes they've been carrying all day. They lash them together on top of the mound to create a valley, palisade. It isn't a permanent stone wall, but to a Dacian horseman, it is an insurmountable barrier of sharpened wood and steep earth. In 3 hours, the 4th cohort has turned a piece of wild Dacia into a piece of sovereign Rome. The surveyors plot map, while the soldiers bleed and dig. The officers are busy with the camp ledger. The Roman army does not leave the layout of a camp to chance or the whims of the terrain. The meditors have already produced a daily plot map on a wax tablet. This document is the blueprint of the night city. It tracks 1. The perimeter calculation, exactly how many meters of trench were dug to ensure no unit shirked their share of the labor. The street widths, ensuring the Via Quintana is wide enough for the baggage wagons to move in case of an emergency. Sanitation zones. The latrines must be dug at the furthest point downwind and away from the water source. This is tracked with bureaucratic obsession. More Roman soldiers are killed by dysentery than by Dacian blades, and the medical officers, Medici, keep a strict log of camp hygiene. If Quintus's section of the trench is not deep enough, or if his stakes are not lashed with the proper military knot, the Centurion won't just yell. He will report the failure to the signifer, who notes it in the unit's performance record. Punishments for sloth in fortification can range from extra night watches to the barley ration, being forced to eat animal feed instead of wheat. The iron cage, by 7 p.m., the camp is complete. To the eye of a modern observer, it looks like a miracle. A rectangular fortress, roughly 50 acres in size, has appeared out of nowhere. It features 4 gates, a grid of streets, a headquarters, and a defensive perimeter that can hold off thousands of attackers. Quintus stands on top of the mound leaning on his shovel. His legs are shaking. His lower back feels as though a hot iron has been pressed against the spine. He looks down at his hands. The dirt of Dacia is wedged so deep under his fingernails that he doubts it will ever come out. But as he looks out over the dark, impenetrable forests beyond the wall, he feels a cold, clinical sense of security. The iron cog has finished its turn for the day. He is inside the cage. The wilderness is outside. Tense up, the Optio bellows from the street below. The digging is over. Now, the mule must become a housekeeper. Quintus climbs down the mound, his hobnails sliding on the fresh earth. He still has to pitch the tent, grind the grain, and clean his armor before he is allowed to close his eyes. The Roman army is a machine that never truly stops. It just changes its mode of operation from moving to building. And as the first watch fires are lit along the new wall, the nightly city begins to hum with the sound of 8-man families settling into their cramped, leather-walled homes. The Roman legion was an army of 5,000 men, but for Quintus, the empire is only 10 feet wide and 10 feet long. This is the Papilio, the butterfly tent, and the 7 men inside it are his contubernails. In the modern world, we talk about squads, but the Roman contubernium was something deeper. It was a legal, financial, and domestic unit. These men didn't just fight together, they lived, slept, ate, and owned property together for 25 years. If the legion is the crushing weight of the Roman machine, the contubernium is the grease that keeps the gears from seizing the portable cell. The Papilio is a masterpiece of Roman industrial production. It is not made of canvas. Canvas rots in the humid Danube basin. Instead, it is made of approximately 77 individual squares of chemically tanned goat skin. This leather is heavy, weighing nearly 40 pounds when dry, and significantly more when soaked by the relentless Dacian rain. It is held up by a simple wooden ridgepole and 2 uprights. Because space is at a premium in a marching camp, the interior is a masterpiece of cramped efficiency. 8 men must fit into a 10-foot by 10-foot space. Once you factor in the space for their armor, shields, and the grain sacks, each man has a sleeping area roughly the size of a modern yoga mat. There is a strict hierarchy even here. The equipment isn't just tossed in a corner. The shields, scuda, are stacked near the entrance for quick access. The pila javelins are leaned against the exterior poles. Inside, the men sleep in 2 rows of 4 feet to feet. In the Roman army, privacy is a luxury that doesn't exist. You know the smell of your brother's breath, the sound of his digestion, and the specific way he moans in his sleep when his old wounds ache. The intimacy of iron. The interior of the tent is a sensory assault. After a 20-mile march and 3 hours of digging, the air is thick with the legionary perfume. It is a pungent cocktail of sour sweat, wet goat hide, and the sharp alkaline smell of the wood ash clinging to their tunics. Quintus sits on his bedroll, his back against a grain sack. He feels the dampness of the earth through the thin leather floor cloth. To his left, Rufus is peeling off his caligae, revealing feet that are white, wrinkled, and bloodied from the day's march. The sound of the tent is not one of conversation, but of maintenance. The scritch of a whetstone against a pugio, dagger. The rhythmic thud of a hand mill grinding wheat. The heavy, wet sighs of men who are too tired to speak. There is an unspoken friction here. 8 men, often from different corners of the world, one from the sun-drenched hills of Italy, another from the cold plains of Gaul, a third from the Spanish coast, forced into a space smaller than a modern prison cell. They are tent mates, a term that in Latin carries the weight of a blood oath. If one man fails to dig, they all stay awake. If one man loses his grain, they all go hungry. If one man breaks in combat, they all die. "Your turn on the mill, Quintus," grunts Silvanus, a barrel-chested veteran from the Rhine frontier. He pushes the heavy stone mola toward Quintus. Quintus doesn't complain. He reaches out and begins the circular grinding motion. This is the sound of the Roman knight, the low guttural growl of stone on stone, turning the state-issued wheat into the flour that will keep them alive for another 24 hours. The communal bank. While the world sees the Legion as a military force, the Contubernium is actually a shared financial corporation. The Roman army lived on records, and the tent ledger was one of the most important. Every Contubernium had a communal fund. A portion of each man's pay, the stipendium, was automatically deducted and placed into a shared mess fund. This money was used to buy the shared mule that carries their tent, the heavy bronze cooking pots, and even the extra oil for their lamps. If the mule dies on the march, the Contubernium, not the Roman state, is often responsible for replacing it. They are, in a very literal sense, business partners in the trade of war. Furthermore, they are a burial club. Quintus and his 7 mates have a legal agreement. If one of them falls in battle, the others are responsible for his funeral rites. In a world where an unburied soul was condemned to wander the banks of the Styx, this was the ultimate insurance policy. The survivors would also ensure that any remaining back pay or personal effects were sent to the fallen soldier's unofficial family, since soldiers were technically forbidden from marrying until 197 AD. The Optio, the second in command, stops by the tent flap, a wax tablet in his hand. "Quintus, Silvanus, you've got the second watch on the north rampart. Rufus, you're on the mule line guard." The names are checked off. The roster is absolute. In the Roman bureaucracy, your Contubernium is your address. If the headquarters needs to find a man, they don't look for his name. They look for his tent group. The internal family. As the oil lamp flickers, Quintus looks at the men around him. He doesn't necessarily like all of them. He finds Rufus's constant complaining about his feet grating. He knows that Silvanus steals more than his share of the communal pasca vinegar water, but he would die for them, and they for him. This is the industrialized version of brotherhood. It isn't based on poetic friendship, it's based on interdependence. In the chaos of the push of shields, Quintus won't be fighting for the glory of Trajan or the Senate and people of Rome. He will be fighting because the man to his left is Rufus, and if Rufus's shield drops, Quintus's flank is open. The Roman machine works because it is built of these unbreakable 8-man atoms. You can kill a legionary, but it is very hard to kill a Contubernium. They are a self-healing organism. If one man dies, a replacement is cycled in, and the veterans like Quintus will spend the next 6 months breaking him in, teaching him the tent ways, the cleaning rituals, and the silent language of the march until he, too, becomes a gear in the machine. Chapter 7, The Diet of a Conqueror. If you believe the silver screen, the Roman legionary spent his evenings roasting whole boars over open pits and carousing with flagons of deep red wine. The reality was far more industrial and significantly more bland. The Roman Empire was not fueled by meat, it was fueled by carbohydrates. Specifically, it was fueled by a hard reddish-brown wheat called emmer or durum. Quintus is not a hunter. He is a consumer of state-provided calories. To the Roman high command, Quintus is a biological engine that requires approximately 3,000 to 3,500 calories a day to function as a heavy laborer and a shock trooper. Delivering those calories to 50,000 men in the middle of a Dacian forest is the greatest logistical feat of the ancient world. The mechanics of the meal. The Roman soldier's diet was centered on the fermentum, the grain ration. Each man received about 1.5 kilograms, roughly 3 pounds of unground grain per day. But Rome didn't issue bread. They issued the raw material. This was a deliberate choice. Whole grain is easier to transport, lasts longer without rotting, and is harder for a soldier to waste or trade away in a single sitting. This means that every evening after the march and the digging, Quintus has to perform the labor of a miller. We saw him in the tent earlier, working the mola manuaria, the hand mill. This device consists of two circular volcanic stones. The bottom stone is stationary, while the top stone is rotated by a wooden handle. It is exhausting work. To grind enough flour for 8 men to have a decent meal takes nearly an hour of constant muscle-straining rotation. This is the industrial war at the microscopic level. The army doesn't just outsource its logistics, it forces the end user to complete the manufacturing process of his own fuel. Once the grain is ground into a coarse meal, Quintus has two choices: bread or porridge. Bread, panis militaris, requires an oven which the marching camp rarely has. So most nights the Contubernium eats pulse. This is a thick wheat pottage, similar to polenta or a very dense oatmeal. They boil the meal in their bronze situla pot with water, a pinch of salt, and if they are lucky, a bit of lard or a handful of gathered wild leeks. It is efficient, it is filling, and it is incredibly boring. The tang of the frontier, the smell of a Roman camp at dinner time isn't the smell of a barbecue. It is the acrid, slightly sour smell of wood smoke and vinegar. Quintus lifts his patera, mess tin, to his lips. Before he eats, he takes a long pull of posca. This is the universal drink of the Roman military. It isn't wine, not really. It is wine that has turned to vinegar, watered down and sometimes flavored with herbs or honey. To a modern palate, posca is repulsive, sharp, acidic, and thin. But to Quintus, it is a lifesaver. The acidity of the vinegar kills many of the pathogens in the local Dacian stream water. It provides a hit of vitamin C to ward off scurvy, and the tartness cuts through the layer of dust and grit that has coated his throat since the morning. It tastes like a rusted iron nail dipped in lemon juice, but it makes him feel alert. The pulse itself is heavy. It sits in the stomach like a lead weight. Quintus feels the heat of the pot through his calloused fingers. The texture is gritty. Bits of the volcanic millstone always end up in the flour, which is why most veteran legionaries like Quintus have teeth that are ground down almost to the gums by the age of 40. There is a grim silence as they eat. They aren't dining, they are refueling. Occasionally, Rufus tosses a small piece of salt pork into the pot, a luxury from the baggage train, but mostly it is just grain. The diet of empire is a vegetarian one by necessity, not by choice. Meat is a supplement, grain is the foundation, the frumentatio ledger. Even here at the edge of the world, the paperwork of empire is watching Quintus's stomach. In the headquarters, Principia, the Prefectus Castrorum, camp prefect, is obsessed with the grain audit. Rome doesn't just give the grain away. As we noted before, the cost of these rations is deducted directly from Quintus's pay. Gross pay, 900 sesterces per year. The food tax, approximately 80 to 100 sesterces, are docked for the frumentum. This creates a fascinating dynamic. Quintus is a paying customer of the Roman state. If the grain issued to the fourth cohort is moldy, infested with weevils, or stretched with sawdust, a common trick of unscrupulous contractors, the soldiers don't just complain, they riot. They are paying for high-quality Mediterranean wheat, and they expect to receive it. The Optio moves through the camp with a small scale. He is performing a spot check on the weight of the remaining grain sacks in each tent. Contubernium 3, he barks. Why is your sack 5 pounds light? Did you trade your rations for Dacia's local rotgut wine again? The Roman army is a closed economic loop. The state buys grain from Egypt or North Africa, sells it to the soldiers, and then uses the soldiers to conquer more land to grow more grain. If a soldier wastes his rations, he is sabotaging the emperor's investment. The caloric fortress. By 8:30 p.m., the meal is over. The bronze pots are cleaned, usually just scrubbed with a handful of sand and a splash of posca, and packed away. Quintus feels the carb crash hitting him. His body is diverting all its remaining energy to digesting the dense wheat paste. This is the physiological reality of the Legion. They are a high-energy, high-output workforce. Without this massive influx of grain, the nightly city would never be built, and the 20-mile march would be impossible. He looks at the fire. It's dying down. Tomorrow, he will wake up and eat a piece of buccellatum, a hard, twice-baked cracker made from the same wheat. It is so hard he will have to soak it in his posca just to be able to bite into it without breaking a tooth. The Roman army is often described as a war machine, but it was just as much a digestive machine. It consumed landscapes, it consumed people, and it consumed millions of tons of wheat. Quintus is just one of the thousands of mouths that turn that wheat into the power required to hold a frontier. The wheat was dusty tonight, Rufus mutters, leaning back. It's wheat, Rufus, Quintus says, standing up to stretch his aching back. It's been dusty since the days of Romulus. Just be glad the weevils were small. Today, Chapter 8, The Centurion's Vine Staff. In the industrial war of Rome, the Legionary is the gear, the logistics are the fuel, and the Centurion is the tension that keeps the whole machine from flying apart. If Quintus is a professional, the Centurion is a manager of violence. He is the bridge between the aristocratic officers who plan the war and the grunts who bleed for it. And his primary tool of management is not a sword, but a piece of wood, the vitus, the anatomy of discipline. The vitus is a staff made from a supple, knotty grapevine. It is more than a swagger stick. It is a legal instrument. In the Roman military code, the centurion possesses the right of castigatio, the legal authority to corporally punish any soldier under his command for infractions of discipline. Why grapevine? Because a grapevine is flexible. It wraps around a limb or a rib cage without snapping, delivering a stinging, bone-deep welter that reminds the soldier that the state's reach is literal and physical. But discipline in the 105 AD Legion isn't just about random beatings. It is a graduated system of quality control designed to ensure the human components of the machine do not fail under pressure. Minor infractions, a rusted buckle, a late arrival to assembly resulted in a taming with the vine staff. Moderate infractions, loss of equipment, sleeping during a non-combat watch could lead to the militiae mutatio being forced to stand all day in front of the headquarters without a belt, a public shaming that stripped a man of his status. Capital crimes, desertion, cowardice, or sleeping on guard duty in enemy territory resulted in the fustuarium. This was the ultimate industrial execution. The culprit was touched by a stone or club by an officer, and then his own comrades, the men of his own contubernium, were legally obligated to beat him to death. To Rome, there was no room for broken parts. If a gear failed, it was discarded. The sound of order. Quintus is outside his tent, oiling the wooden core of his shield. When he hears it, the rhythmic clack thud of boots and the distinctive swish of the vine staff cutting through the air, he doesn't look up in the Legion. Looking up at a passing officer without being addressed is an invitation for attention you don't want. But he hears the Centurion stop 3 tents down. Legionary cellar. The Centurion's voice is a low, gravelly rasp, polished by years of shouting over the din of clashing shields. Why is your pilum leaning against the tent pole instead of being racked? There is no answer. There is no excuse in the Roman army. There is only the sound of the vitus, a sharp, wet crack as it strikes the wool-covered shoulder of the young soldier. Quintus hears the air leave Cellar's lungs in a pained grunt. Then another crack, and a third. The smell in the air changes. It's the scent of cold adrenaline and the metallic tang of fear. The other men in Quintus's tent have stopped their murmuring. They sit perfectly still, staring at their own gear. This is the atmosphere of order. It isn't based on love for the emperor, it is based on the absolute certainty that the Centurion is more dangerous than the Dacians. The Centurion, a man named Marcus Petronius, moves on. He is 50 years old, a man who has risen through the ranks over 30 years. His face is a map of scars, one from a Germanic axe, another from a riot in Alexandria. He doesn't hate the men, he simply views them as tools that must be kept sharp. If a tool becomes dull, he sharpens it with the vine, the labellus of punishment. While the beating is physical, the consequences are bureaucratic. Behind the Centurion walks his optio, second in command, who carries the libellus, a small wooden notebook covered in wax. Every strike of the vine staff is potentially recorded. The Roman army keeps a conduct sheet for every man. These records determine everything. 1. Promotion. You cannot become a principalis, a junior officer, if your record is littered with shameful punishments. 2. Pay. Certain punishments involve the aeraria fines that are deducted from the soldier's savings account held in the Legionary bank. Discharge. A soldier with a black mark on his record might receive a causaria missio, dishonorable discharge, losing his right to the retirement land grant he has spent 20 years earning. Quintus knows that in the Principia, headquarters, there is a clerk whose entire job is to update these tablets. The Roman army is the first organization in history to realize that you can control men through their wallets just as effectively as through their backs. The optio stops by Quintus. Quintus, your scutum cover has a tear. Half an inch. Fix it by the morning watch, or I'll have the Centurion take a look at your stitching. Quintus nods once. Understood, optio. The officer moves on. Quintus reaches for his needle and a strip of leather. He doesn't feel anger toward the optio. He feels a cold, professional appreciation for the standard. In the dark forested valleys of Dacia, where the barbarians fight with individual fury and chaotic courage, the only thing that keeps Quintus alive is the fact that every man to his left and right is terrified of being the weak link, the manager of violence. By 9:30 p.m., the Centurion's rounds are finished. He returns to his own tent, a larger, more comfortable affair, to meet with the other Centurions of the 4th cohort. They aren't discussing glory. They are discussing morbidity and maintenance. How many men are in the valetudinarium, hospital with foot rot? Which contubernium is lagging in their trench digging? Who is due for the night watch? This is the industrial leadership. It is cold, it is data-driven, and it is utterly unsentimental. The Centurion is the foreman of the factory floor. He knows which men are fatigued, which ones are malcontents, and which ones can be relied upon to hold a breach. Quintus puts his shield away. The fear of the vine staff has done its job. It has pushed the exhaustion out of his mind and forced him to focus on the minute details of his equipment. He is ready for the night watch. He is ready for the march. He is ready to kill. The Roman machine is tight. Every screw is turned. Every gear is oiled. And the Centurion, with his gnarled stick of grapevine, has ensured that for at least one more night, the 4th cohort will not break. Chapter 9, The Evening Shadow. The march is over. The digging is done. The Centurion has passed. For most men, this would be the time for sleep. But for the Roman legionary, the battle against the enemy is often less exhausting than the battle against the environment. In the humid, river-misted valleys of Dacia, the greatest threat to the 4th cohort isn't a Dacian arrow, it is oxidation and rot. This is the industrial maintenance phase of the day. If Quintus neglects his equipment for even one night, the machine begins to fail. A rusted hinge on a shoulder plate could snap during a sword thrust. A rotted leather strap could dump his shield into the mud at the worst possible moment. The chemistry of the legion. The Roman army was perhaps the first in history to understand the science of preventative maintenance on a continental scale. Quintus spends the next hour engaged in a ritual of chemical preservation. The iron Lorica segmentata. The segmentata is made of soft iron, not stainless steel. It wants to return to the earth as rust. Quintus uses a rag soaked in olive oil, the same oil he might use for cooking, to rub down every inch of the plates. For stubborn spots of rust, he uses a handful of fine river sand as an abrasive. The leather is the glue of the Roman army. It holds the armor together, makes the boots, and forms the tents. But in Dacia, the leather is constantly cycling between being soaked by rain and dried by campfire heat. This makes it brittle. Quintus applies adeps, animal fat lard, to his caligae, and the internal straps of his armor to keep them supple. If the leather cracks, the soldier becomes a liability. The wood, his shield, the scutum, is a composite of plywood strips glued together. Moisture is its nemesis. Quintus checks the leather cover for tears and ensures the bronze boss, the center nut, is tight. If the wood warps, the shield loses its structural integrity and can split under a heavy blow. The grit and the oil. The air around Quintus is thick with a specific heavy scent, the smell of hot iron and rancid fat. It is a metallic, greasy aroma that lingers in his nostrils and coats the back of his throat. The sound is a low, rhythmic shuck, shuck, shuck as hundreds of men in the surrounding tents rub oil into metal. It is the sound of a factory winding down, but never quite stopping. Quintus's hands are black. The mixture of iron filings, old oil, and Dacian dust has created a thick, permanent grime under his fingernails and in the creases of his knuckles. As he works, he feels the shadow of the campaign. His joints ache, a deep thrumming pain in his knees and lower back that only stops when he is horizontal. To his right, in the flickering light, he sees a man being carried toward the center of the camp on a stretcher. He doesn't look. He knows where they are going. The valetudinarium, the industrialization of healing, the capsari. The Roman medical system was as standardized as their trench digging. Near the headquarters stands the medical tent manned by the capsari, the combat medics. These men are soldiers first, but they carry a capsa, a cylindrical box full of bandages and basic surgical tools. Behind them are the medici, the professional doctors of the Legion. In 105 AD, these men are using tools that wouldn't be out of place in a 19th century hospital: bronze scalpels, bone saws, and forceps. The Legion treats its men like its equipment. Quintus once heard a veteran say, "If you can be fixed, they fix you. If you're broken beyond repair, they find a way to get the last bit of use out of you before they toss you." The Roman approach to medicine was clinical and hygiene-focused. They knew that boiled water and clean linen saved more lives than prayers to Aesculapius. They used honey as an antiseptic and vinegar as a disinfectant. It was industrial medicine, designed to keep the maximum number of units, soldiers, in the field. The sick bay roster. In the medical tent, the optio valetudinari, the hospital administrator, is busy with his own set of tablets. He is compiling the morning health report. The Roman army tracks its human depreciation with cold accuracy. The report includes, in loco, men who are wounded but can still perform light duties like cleaning the camp. In valetudinario, men who are bedridden. Mortui, the dead. This data is crucial. The legate needs to know his combat effectiveness. If 10% of the 4th cohort is down with the bloody flux, dysentery, the legate might cancel the next day's march. Quintus finishes his armor. He picks up his Pugio dagger and checks the edge. He isn't on the sickbay roster tonight, but he knows he's only one bad step or one contaminated stream away from it. He reaches into his tunic and pulls out a small leaden amulet, a token of the goddess Fortune. He doesn't pray for glory. He just prays that the Roman machine keeps him on the in loco list rather than the mortui one. The shadow falls. By 10 p.m., the camp is as quiet as it will ever be. The industrial work of the day, the marching, the digging, the eating, the beating, and the cleaning is done. Quintus stands up, his knees cracking like dry kindling. He pulls his wool cloak around him. He looks at his armor, now resting in its leather bag, oiled and ready for the 3 a.m. horn. It gleams dully in the dying firelight, a cold iron promise of another day. He crawls into the tent, finding his 6-foot patch of dirt among the snoring bodies of his brothers. The evening shadow has finally claimed the camp. But for Quintus, the rest is haunted by the weight of the day and the looming reality of the frontier. Chapter 10: The Retirement Dream. Why does a man spend 25 years as a mule? Why does he endure the weight of the sarcina, the bite of the vine staff, the grit in his porridge, and the constant low-thrumming fear of a falx blade opening his stomach? In the industrial war of Rome, Quintus is a professional, but he is also a laborer. And like every laborer in history, he is working for a pension. The Roman army was the first institution to turn military service into a middle-class career path. For Quintus, the legion isn't just a shield against the barbarians. It is a ladder out of the grinding poverty of the Italian Subura. But as he nears his 20th year of service, the dream is beginning to look very different from the reality. The honesta missio, the Roman retirement system, was as standardized as their armor. There were 3 ways out of the legion. 1. Causaria missio, medical discharge. If you lost a limb or your sight, you were sent home with a small prorated payment. Ignominiosa missio, dishonorable discharge. You were stripped of your belt, your pay, and your right to ever call yourself a Roman soldier. Honesta missio, the honorable discharge. This is what Quintus is hunting. After 25 years, or 20 for veterans like Quintus who might be fast-tracked during a major war, a soldier receives 2 things. First, a diploma, 2 small bronze tablets lashed together with wire, proving his service, and, if he was an auxiliary, granting him full Roman citizenship. Second, the Praemia Militiae, a discharge bounty. In 105 AD, this bounty is roughly 12,000 sesterces, about 13 years of a regular soldier's salary in one lump sum. Alternatively, the emperor might grant him a plot of land in a newly conquered province. To a man who has owned nothing but the contents of a leather bag for a quarter century, 12,000 sesterces is the promise of a farm, a small shop, or a comfortable old age. It is the golden handshake of the ancient world. The ghost of the frontier, Quintus feels the dampness of the Danube mist on his face. His knees are stiff, a permanent aching reminder of the 100,000 miles he has marched since he first took the oath sacramentum as a teenager. The dream in his head used to be a small olive grove near Capua. He used to imagine the smell of sun-warmed earth, the sound of cicadas, and the taste of wine that didn't need vinegar to be drinkable. He imagined a wife who didn't smell like a goatskin tent and children who didn't have to learn how to sharpen a dolabra. But as he looks out over the gray, jagged landscape of Dacia, the sensory reality of his life takes over. He realized years ago that he no longer knows how to be a civilian. The industrial war has rewired his brain. He wakes up at the 4th watch even when there is no horn. He cleans his kitchen knife as if it were a Pugio. He finds himself gauging the defensibility of every hill he sees. The retirement dream for most legionaries isn't a return to the soft heart of Italy. It is a transition to a colonia. Rome settles its veterans in colonies on the very frontiers they just conquered. This is the final, most cynical stroke of the Roman machine. The state pays you your pension in land that acts as a human buffer. You're retired, but you are still a gear in the wall. You are a veteran farmer with a sword under your bed, ready to defend your new home if the tribes ever return. The tabularium of the dead. In the Principia, the administrative heart of the camp, the clerks are currently processing the pension forecasts. The Roman state has a massive problem. It owes thousands of men like Quintus a fortune in back pay and discharge bounties. To fund this, Augustus created the Aerarium Militare, a dedicated military treasury funded by a 1% tax on sales and a 5% tax on inheritances. Quintus's entire life is tracked in the tabularium, the archives. His age, his wounds, his promotions, and his savings account held in the Legionary bank. If Quintus dies today, the paperwork doesn't stop. His burial club will be paid out, and his heirs, usually his tentmates or an unofficial family, will fight the bureaucracy for months to claim his back pay. The Roman army is the only place in the world where a poor man's death is an itemized, audited event. The final watch, the sun finally breaks the horizon. The Bucina horn sounds, the same mournful, brassy blast that started the day in Chapter 1. Quintus watches the relief guard come up the rampart. He sees a young recruit, maybe 18 years old, whose armor is still bright and whose eyes are still wide with the terror of the frontier. Quintus sees himself in that boy 20 years ago, before the dust of Germany and the mud of Dacia turned his soul into iron. The industrial war doesn't care about Quintus's memories. It doesn't care about his knees. It only cares that he stands his post until the next man takes it. He steps down from the rampart. He walks back toward the Contubernium, where Rufus and the others are already beginning the ritual of the Sarcina. They are packing the tents. They are grinding the grain. They are oiling the plates. Quintus reaches for his pack. He heaves the 80-pound pole onto his shoulder. He feels the familiar thud of the weight settling into the grooves of his muscles. He has 5 years left. 5 years of marching, 5 years of digging, and 5 years of the vine staff. He isn't a hero. He isn't a villain. He is a professional. Move out, the Centurion screams from the street. Quintus takes his first step of the day. The hobnails of his boots bite into the earth. Behind him, 5,000 men do the same. The iron cog turns once more. The machine is moving, and as the fourth cohort marches out of the gate and into the rising sun of Dacia, the individual man named Quintus disappears, swallowed by the rhythmic, metallic, and unstoppable sound of the Roman Empire on the move. The Roman Legionary was a cog in a professional, state-sponsored factory of war, but he wasn't the first to master the shield wall. If you want to see how the industrial war of Rome compares to the amateur high-honor brutality of the city-states that came before, click the link on the screen now for a day in the life of a Greek warrior. See how the citizen hoplite paved the way for the professional soldiers who would eventually inherit the Mediterranean. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more deep dives into the front lines of history.